Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Straw with another episode of Producing Out Loud here at Pyramind. I'm here with our CEO and founder, Greg Gordon. To my right, your left.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. And we're excited today. We're joined by Aaron Bethune, who is a published author, a session guitarist in his former life, I believe, right? And author of a book called The Musicpreneur, which is why he's here today to talk with us. Yeah, I don't think we've had a published author on our podcast yet, so that's kind of exciting. Big fan of the book, and I know you've got a lot of interesting concepts that we can dig into. So they know us, that's for sure, here in the podcast land. So why don't I just give you a quick second to give us a little bit of your background, kind of where you got your start, without going into the too deep in the woods details. But let's start with that, and then let's hop in to talk about the book.
Sure. So I think like a lot of people in the industry, I started with a keen interest in music on the performance side. I was like probably a lot of people encouraged by my family once upon a time to do music. I started with piano and then was told to practice a little too much. And so I sort of thought I wasn't going to be into that. So when I was 7, I picked up the guitar, and then I guess fast forward to secondary education, I took a degree in jazz performance, which brought back, piano again. You sort of have to do piano to do, I guess, harmony and theory and whatnot. And I think, again, like a lot of people that are pursuing music as a career, I went down the path of performing in bands and, just all that, what that entails. And then I was the one guy in the band, which there always seems to be one guy in the band that kind of does the business. And I became that guy. And, partly doing it for my own music, and then finding people on a more local level, kind of reaching out and saying, hey, we've noticed you did this or that, could you do this for us? And I was building relationships. It sort of, it turned into, okay, well, like everyone else, school's going to come to an end. I need to figure out what I'm going to do. And I need to, turn that into revenue, and I'd like it to be music. And I guess I became one of these people that, I say something and then I do everything I can to do it.
Nice.
So, with the book, for example, one day someone said, what are you doing? I said, I'm writing a book. And I was like, well, I better write a book now. And the same thing was sort of going on with the music industry. For example, I booked Sly and the Family Stone, their first tour of Japan, while I was in college. And I remember, because I was making these calls from my little apartment to these different, agents, and anyways, how that all works. But anyways, I was making all these calls, and so when it came down to it, and I'd met them in Europe, and there's a longer story to this, but I'd be in my apartment making these calls, and I remember when it came down to it, and it was a done deal. They were going to be performing here and there, and these different festivals and whatnot. The sum of money that was involved was quite substantial, but all of a sudden I was like, I don't know how to. Like, how do I make money? I didn't know how I was going to make money. And it was kind of concerning to me. I was like, because if I'm going to be putting that kind of money in my bank account,
probably should have
what
worked.
if Sly doesn't show up?
Yeah, well, you probably should have worked that out first, right? That's pretty funny.
So this is like really early days, I guess. But my point is that was my approach to everything. I'd be like, so I went through every possible component, I would say, of the music industry, everything from guitar tech to managing, to booking agent, to tour manager, and every step of the way, I'd always be building relationships, but I always wanted to know more, like how else can I, turn this into my life? And so I got into music licensing and publishing and all these different areas. And I would, again, build more relationships, learn more things, learn, the different laws, learn how to make money, which I can assure you that if I was to go in a time capsule and return to college, I'd have made a whack of money off Sly, but I didn't. But that being said, that was my process. And I've produced records. I just co-produced a record with a bunch of B.B. King's guys and one of Elvis's, and so I've done that, session work, songwriting. So I've done a bit of everything, and then eventually I started doing some workshops because some places started asking, hey, would you come and talk and this sort of thing. And after the workshops, I had a whole bunch of information that I put together and a lot of feedback. And I thought, well, either I just move on to the next thing, or maybe I can bundle this together and make it more valuable by putting it out there to people. And that's what turned into the book. And the Musicpreneur title was, I mean, of course, it is music meets entrepreneurship. But it was also, I guess, a bet on the evolution of the industry and the DIY musician becoming the musicpreneur. And there was a few people out there that were sort of using the term. I'd definitely say Tommy Darker's taken it on as his quest to take that word far and wide. And I was also thinking, I guess, of the Gene Simmons whole thing of one word and all the rest of it. And so I'm actually quite glad that I did go with that, because the first one was going to be, Jack of all trades, or something like that. It was just like, and then everyone's going to say master of none and all that kind of thing. So I'm glad I didn't go with that. But nonetheless, it has exploded. That you'll see that term used everywhere. There's even, I think, mumpreneurs now. So artistpreneurs, and so anyways, and of course it was nice to find a title that didn't have 53 other books on Amazon. Like, I do the search on Amazon or any of these places for Musicpreneur and it come back with 0 results, and I was like, well, this is going to explode. People will be looking for Musicpreneur and I will reap the benefits.
SEO, baby. SEO. Very nicely done. Cool. Well, that's a great little walkthrough, because I didn't knew a little bit about your background, but I didn't realize you had worn quite so many hats, so literally and figuratively. Right?
You've definitely kind of embodied the name that you've created for your book and what you do.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, and so I think there's one of the highlights, or at least one of the chapters I think we've highlighted, is the concept of fan cultivation, and knowing that that's such a big part of what artists are getting into. They may not realize it going in, because so many people are just, hey, I'm all about making music, right?
Right.
And then once you've made the music, clearly you've got to take that next step, which is engaging with your fan base and finding out or figuring out who they are. And that's a big part of what you talk about in your book, right? Mm-hmm. And what kind of led you down that path to building resources or exploring where the best resources are for fan engagement and developing your fan base?
I think it came from recognizing that there was a lot of people operating on decision making with a lack of knowledge. And when they say, what is it, make an informed decision, where there was a lot of decisions being made that were not informed. And as you well know, the music industry, like any sort of artistic endeavor, has a lot of emotional, touchy-feely, I have a good vibe, this sort of thing attached to it. But unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily equate to good business.
No, because
accountants
clearly
don't have,
we live in the age of big data now, right? So
absolutely. And I mean, if you look at an accountant, I'm glad accountants are not touchy-feely, I have a vibe, because that wouldn't be very good. And I think that, with that being said, there's actually a guy who I met, Jay Frank, who I think he's head of something to do with data at Universal, I believe, but he had this book that was talking about hack your hit. And he said that, I think it was, if you listen to all new music that gets released this week and you spent 24 hours a day, 7 days of the week, you'd still not even be able to listen physically to 5% of music. And clearly you're not going to spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it was just sort of emphasizing the fact that, if you're making touchy-feely, I believe this is a great idea, constantly without any understanding of what you're up against and also where there may be opportunity, then it really would make for people making a lot of shots in the dark as far as just what they decide to do next. And so, I would classify myself as a creative person, but at the same time, I think I have enough sort of left brain functioning going on that, I wanted to try and get past the initial sort of emotional aspect of music and go beyond it and understand more on the data. And in doing that, I started to find a lot of different tools that it wasn't so much that those tools were necessarily developed to use them as I was using them, but they were tools that were all providing some sort of data points that if you took a sort of a perspective on how that tool could be used, like, for example, when Patreon came out, I thought that was an awesome platform. And obviously it's there to create content or have an audience that's going to want to buy into what you do on a regular basis. Yep. But, for me, understanding more about your fan base would be, as an example, if you've identified that your music maybe has some similarities and there's many different points you could look at as considering similar. But if you have similarities with another band, that sometimes is a good way of finding out who's their audience, where are their fans coming from, where are they populating, online, offline, this sort of thing. And so, it was this, if you could take that information and then go on something like a Patreon, you could also see who are the people that have supported that person. So now you could take all of those people, because they, have right there supporters or whatever they call them, or Patreons, I guess. And you could go onto their profiles and you could do a quick Google search as to who that person is, maybe attach music to it, maybe attach the location to it, whatever it is, then start finding their social platforms. I'm not saying it's a quick fix, but certainly the approach becomes one of, looking at what's available in ways that work for you. And so, from that standpoint, I was looking at maybe all the things that wasn't working, like artists saying, we should be on this radio station because no one else sounds like us. And it's like, well, audio branding on radio stations doesn't work like that. If you don't sound like what they've got, people are off the station. Their advertising dollars go down, and it's not a business. So you don't want to sound different. You want to sound like. But again, you've got all these guys in a band that have grown up listening to different radio stations or being fans of certain bands, and then they just assume that because they like that when they make music, they sound like that. It's sort of like if, I don't know if I can come up with a great example, but it's sort of like if you listen to a death metal band, and as much as you try, you continue to be sort of a beautiful tenor voice, you can think that you might belong in that category, but, there's just so many factors that don't really support you on that.
Back to,
so again,
I totally agree. And back to your concept around Patreon and this kind of, fishing for data almost from another entity. Not that you're fishing, but, I'm a big proponent of that, of seeing who the kind of like landmark artists are in your sound or in your genre. Mm-hmm. And what do you take away from the Cascades and Deadmau5s of the world? And then look kind of like 3 steps down from that tier of like world fame and domination within your sound, and see what are the guys that are touring the small clubs that are still making that sound, that are probably a lot more accessible for a young artist to piggyback on some of the strategies that they have. And I never really even thought about like actually hunting down some of their fans and some of their big supporters and doing maybe Facebook campaigns to try and target them, maybe just hitting them up on Twitter with a message. I mean, there's a million ways to get a hold of people these days, right?
Yeah, but some of that can be obviously really time consuming and very granular. What would you say? I mean, if somebody was to ask you, what platforms are there out there that actually can do this on a broader level that can help an emerging artist to really focus in on their fan base without having to kind of go one by one trying to dissect another artist's, supporting platforms?
Well, I'm a big fan of looking at things through different lenses. So I'll talk about some platforms in a moment. However, I think before even getting to the platform, it's that perspective. So just like if you're on Patreon and you're there for the general reasons, it's a different lens than if you're there looking to see who's the fan of so-and-so and that sort of thing. And I think that, there's been this 1,000 true fans. I don't know if it's not theory, but I guess whatever you want to call that.
Yeah, sure.
And then there's the Dunbar number, which is 150. We cannot have more than 150 real relationships in our lives. And even that is, again, would be very time consuming to nurture 150 relationships. However, if the perspective is, there's 1,000 true fans, $100 each, 100,000 a year, which, still not that great if you're 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 in a band. But instead of worrying about, like you're saying, on a granular level of how do I get 1,000 people that I'm connecting with, but rather how do I identify 150 even that are, or even 50 major influencers in different industries, that would be a really great place to start. Because one of the things I kind of jumped out at me when doing a bunch of research for the book and just looking at tools that are getting used was, it's like the music industry is this thing, this circle, and everyone that's in it is just kind of bouncing off the walls on the inside. And music, on the other hand, is getting out of the music industry, but the people that, like as in artists and that sort of whole ecosystem are all in that little sphere. And so, for example, you'll find that most, or at least at the time when I was doing the research, a large percentage of followers of bands were other bands.
Yeah.
And part of that was, if I can get, all these people following me, because I'll follow them first, so this numbers game, then I will have all these people, and suddenly that will equate to money. But really, you're pursuing broke musicians that are trying to get followers that happen to be musicians. I mean, it's just this, and everyone's in this space where there isn't actually really a ton of money in the sense of that whole idea of numbers and followers.
Right.
There is, if you know the target audience and you know how to target them. But just to have this kind of, I'm just going to go after 1 million people everywhere and anywhere, or maybe I'll pay for a bot, doesn't work. And so at the time, and it's still a tool that I think is useful, Hootsuite, for example, it's not really a tool of what we're talking about, but it is a nice dashboard that allows for you to have a lot of different social platforms in one place, to be able to monitor your brand, which I know is kind of a dirty word at times in the music business, but it has that monitoring opportunity. But one of the things that one of the ways I used it when I was, again, writing the book was I took keywords, and I went to every major city on the planet that spoke English, and I typed in keywords within a 5-kilometer radius of downtown, or whatever that city was. And most, of course, major cities do have English speakers anyway. And what I would do is I would have in these keywords, which, again, there's an important aspect to the question you're asking as well, as in what are those keywords. But nonetheless, I'd have these keywords, and then what would happen is it would start populating these
feeds.
What do they call them? Streams. Yeah. With people talking about those keywords. And then what I would do is I'd filter them by clout, because at the time, I don't know if Hootsuite still does this. And my brother-in-law works at Hootsuite, so I should know. But anyway, the point is that I would filter it by clout, and now all of a sudden you're, whatever it was, on one hand, maybe 100 people, 20 people, 1,000 people would get dramatically reduced, because I'd go in with who has the highest clout score. So now you've identified influencers of that particular set of keywords in those city. Particular locations. Right. Now all of a sudden I'm targeting those particular influencers by just engaging in conversation versus trying to do this sort of scatter thing. Because if they're an influencer, there's a chance that if I have enough communication with them, that they're going to be the ones that spread my good name, so to speak. And so, what I also would do is I would follow it up, and I would do my no agenda tour, where I would actually go and meet with people too that I'd actually connected with. So I would go to them, and some of them, were pretty high up there in different areas of the music industry and out of the music industry. And they'd say, so what are we talking about, Aaron? And I'd say, well, we're not. We're just here to kind of hang and get to know you, because it's just too weird to not know you when there's a social component online.
Right.
So
that's a really interesting.
It is, but it also kind of goes back to, well, what was your keyword strategy then? Because kind of the keyword strategy you implement helps define those fans and who those influencers are. So how would you develop that?
I mean, you're definitely tapping into my very nerdy side with these questions. There's a touchy-feely vibe side as well.
Well, we're kind of nerdy over here too. We
but,
like the nerdy side of things. This has become a pretty nerdy world, you know.
Yeah, it's overly nerdy. But with that being said, the search words, I mean, you could use a touchy-feely kind of take on what are the search words. You could also go on to different platforms to find out what people are searching on Google. You know, this sort of thing, which could become the topics that you're looking for, and then maybe consider how would someone talk about that within their conversation. So in other words, you know, that just the tense of the word, or, you know, maybe it's not the word itself, but rather now you know the topic. Because if you're actually searching within conversations, you've got to consider that people aren't robots or they're not dictionaries. So there's going to be something that sort of leads to that component. And sometimes it's the combination. You know, I mean, if they're talking about music and tech, you know, that might say more than say music and production or music and rehearsal.
Right.
You know, like there's that side of what sort of conversations you're going to tap into. For example, if you were looking at, you know, from a music licensing standpoint, you know, there's some very private briefs that never make it to the general public, and then there's music supervisors out there, especially those that are kind of creating an sort of a name for themselves as curators of current music, that might be actively putting out there that they're looking for something for the next episode.
Sure. But for the purposes of this discussion, let's reel it into just fans and, you know, the concept of the fan and, you know, kind of focusing in on keyword strategy, perhaps around
so keyword strategy
your
with
fan
the fan
base. Yeah.
So that would come back to having acknowledged to some degree, perhaps as a starting point, sound alikes. So, or some sort of alignment with another band, because, for example, it might be as easy saying, I don't know, someone is searching for, I don't know, Beyonce. Bad choice. I would absolutely, as Jeff, as you were saying, look at the Beyonce, go down a few levels until you get to someone who's maybe, ideally, actually just known on a regional level. That would be a real hot spot, and start using those names. Search just literally the band name within the context of your keyword search.
Yeah. The other thing I think along those lines, and this is across the board for whether it's your press release or your one sheet or whatever, is whenever possible, have a third party that you trust with some musicologist sort of set of ears tell you who you sound like.
Right.
Because, man, I think I sound like all sorts of people that I probably don't sound like. Do you know what I mean? And I think that artists have a very kind of hazy view of their own music.
It's a bit forest for the trees.
It's too personal, right? It's hard to say that, oh, yeah, I need a better snare or whatever. Maybe that's easy, but I really do sound like Skrillex in my dubstep production. But you totally don't, right? And so having we love that here because we're surrounded by students and other teachers, and it's easy for those kids to get feedback when they're here on campus from us. But out there in the wild, maybe it's connecting with a band to just say, hey, what does this new track we just finished remind you of? And I just find that that's such a nice, like you said, lens to see yourself through another set of ears. It's really, because it could potentially turn you on to new music, right? If they say, oh, you sound exactly like this band from Sweden and I love them and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, I've never heard of them. Now I'm a fan of them, right? Yeah. As well as, like, if you really are in that vein, then it gives you a nice thing to latch onto. And along those same lines, I find that on Facebook, that's a great strategy as well when you're getting into paid search, totally. Right? As you can find fans of those bands in those areas and do these little micro geo campaigns, much like you were just saying within Hootsuite on the sort of organic side to engage with conversation. But you can, start to spend nominal amounts of money and get in front of, hundreds if not thousands of people that are fans of that crazy band in Sweden, but that live here in my backyard. And if I'm playing gigs in this backyard, I want I'm only going to spend money locally. I might plant seeds organically in New York or LA or wherever, trying to look for those fans. But as I'm starting to spend money around developing my brand locally, I'm going to be smart where those dollars are spent. But it's the same. Absolutely. It's the same theory.
Well, there's a couple things I could add to that. I mean, I think it's Echo Nest that I think Spotify had acquired as their back end. Yeah. So Echo Nest, I'm certain they still have this. They have a lab section. So I don't know what the address is, but for example, in one point in time, it might have been echonest.com/labs. And what that does, what that is these really out of the box, quirky at times apps or applications of the Echo Nest set of tools. And so, there's the Infinite playlist, I think it is, and they've got it's worth actually checking out just out of curiosity. But that actually does offer, or did offer certainly, a way of plugging in some of those bands that you sound like, or you think you might sound like, and it coming up with an incredible amount of artists that you've never heard of before, which gives you leads. You could also use another of their tools that shows intensity, volume, danceability, all these different things. You could, so there's ways to pull from these tools to help you to find that out. The other thing too is that on a music licensing level, one of the things I've seen a lot of bands do is sort of get the licensing opportunity and then basically run to their friends and family going, look at this, I got this thing. And, it sort of ends there with bragging rights. And, there's a lot of shows that will, for example, have players on their website. They know who their audience is, which the artist might not. So they know who their audience is. They've selected your music as something that fits with their overall audio brand and their show. Now you can see a playlist with other artists they've selected that could also be a way of going down that path of people you might sound like, just like utilizing where the best ratings of that show might be in order to then apply it to your tour route. There's a lot of those kind of things. Okay, what I would say though, again, is that since writing the book, there are tools that have put more of a focus on doing just this, understanding your audience, understanding the data that's being collected from many different platforms. Some of the tools themselves used to be available and they no longer are. In fact, I think that if you're looking to get on, say, Next Big Sound, it used to be a matter of sign up here, these are your options, the freemium to premium, and this is the cost. Now I think you have to sort of request to become a client, and they might say no because they're too, that sort of thing.
Right.
But I had a conversation with a company the other day, which really blew my mind as far as how they're taking information and data and turning it into opportunity. And with that being said, their tool is amazing, and I'm sure you can do a lot of what they do with many different tools, but they certainly don't cater to the musician who qualifies as maybe that 99% that are still trying to achieve financial freedom and aren't going to be able to pay their sort of fee. So, I think that a lot of these, as a lot of this tech, starts off with freemium options and things that people couldn't afford, and then as they get better, they become acquired. It's just, so it's, again, going back to the putting different lenses on. Mm-hmm. I think the important thing is if you want to be in this world of social media, you have to stay up to date, and you also have to ensure that you're always looking through the lens that corresponds to you and that corresponds to what you want to achieve with those platforms. Now, with that all being said, and going back to that sort of, ecosystem of the music industry where people are sort of ping-ponging around, and meanwhile the music is seeping out, but these musicians are all sort of following the herd. I think that one of the added aspects of understanding who your audience is then also understanding who would value that. And I know that this goes against the grain of pursuit of music for all exclusively the right reasons of creating, and the slow build, and the creating of an organic fan base. I think at the same time, if you're looking for ways to have the opportunity to perhaps come up with funds, because again, even music licensing, I mean, if you're not going to license your song for $350, then hey, that person will. So there's this sort of, it used to be great and now it's not as great in a lot of that, of those areas. However, if you know who your audience is, it's kind of like, there's this band, and I've talked about this before, but I remember there's this band here on the West Coast, and we looked into all the things that their audience kind of connected on. Mm-hmm. Because once you start to know who they are, then you get to have a better idea. I
And
mean,
how did
you know,
you
it's like-
how
it's
did you
like
figure
music
out
dem-
what that audience connected on? Because that's like I'm just curious. Is there a tech piece or is it a anecdotal? Like how did you figure
well,
out that Venn diagram of like overlapping interests around my fans? Right, that's where this is.
Well, I think it's, I mean, there, at the time, there was no fast way about it. I think that, for example, this company that, you know, charges a lot but does great work would be able to do it at a snap of a finger,
Right,
per se.
right.
But again, once you've started to create these organic followers, then you can start taking time. And I mean, this is not necessarily the best example, but you know, if you want to get sort of snooping on Facebook, I mean, if you've identified certain fans, I mean, technically, if you take a handful, it's kind of like, it's like radio and royalties, and it's not that every person that got played gets money for every time they're played, but rather that, you know, depending on the different collecting societies, performing rights organizations, they take samples, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
you can sample your own audience,
Yep.
and if you sample your audience and start to see similarities that are coming up in a small sample, chances are that unless it's some really strange coincidence, it might be a picture of the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think the insights, you know, around like your Twitter analytics and your Facebook analytics as you start to develop followers is another good place to see some of that corollary interest and data around the fan base,
Absolutely.
right?
And I
Well,
think
that speaks a
in
lot to having a conversation with your fan base, right? So you want to engage your fan base. You don't want to passively sit there and just put out your music and see what they say.
Oh, totally.
The more you engage them, the more you begin to build the relationships that allow you to understand what it is they're excited about and what moves them. You know, that's a big piece of this equation, right?
Well, and I would encourage anybody to, as quickly as possible, convert to email marketing, so that there's a direct relationship. Sweepstakes. I mean, you can do sweepstakes. There's a lot of platforms that, you know, you can do sweepstakes with, give people different options of what they can do through, you know, give themselves more entries by tweeting about it or playing a video, whatever the heck you want to do, and which, you know, says something on the surface, which thing people were more keen to do, that they all go to YouTube,
Right.
you know, and at the same time, these platforms will give you their birth dates. So, I mean, they give you all kinds of information. So there's lots of ways to collect that. And again, I think the email is beyond the stage, is the most direct way to make someone also feel like you're connecting with them, because, you know, if you're connecting with somebody and it says something like, have I ever got a deal for you? I don't know, whatever. It's like, okay. And then you look at who it's sent to, and its subject is undisclosed recipients. I'm like, okay. That wasn't actually going to me. That was going to me and another 9 million people. And there was actually a guy that wrote to me who wrote to me 3 times. And by the time I wrote back to him, I said, man, I didn't know you were writing to me. And this guy was one of the guys who plays in the Saturday Night Live band. And I was like, it was so written that way that I thought I was just one of a zillion,
Wow.
you know, that we're getting it. So being able to be very personal, being able to identify your audience, and then, you know, again, very nerdy, but whether it's by location or by age groups or whatever it is, then you can start writing to them in a direct way. Now, in the case of this band on the West Coast, one of the things that came up was Lululemon. Sorry, it was yoga.
Right.
And of course, you know, there's a very cliche. Well, here on the West Coast, we hug trees and, you know, eat granola bars and do yoga and that kind of thing. And but with that being said, this was one of those those similarities. And so my thought process was, okay, well, if that's the case, then chances are that maybe that's going to give us information on where to approach people. Maybe the venue isn't the 19 plus, you know, heavy booze kind of bar atmosphere. Maybe it's the yoga classes or whatever. And then it was like, okay, well, who's a great company on the West Coast that connects with Lululemon? Okay, well, could we look at how Lululemon are promoting their product, knowing that they're projecting to a group of people that happen to also be your audience.
Right.
And just like if you're thinking of hiring a PR person, I wouldn't suggest that an artist of that nature would be able to afford Lululemon's publicist, but it might be a way of thinking.
Right, sure,
I'm going to
sure,
go to Lululemon's publicist versus I'm going to go to whatever music person. And, you know, could you say that everyone that shows up in Lululemon pants pays 25% of the ticket fee? You know, like, what could you do to overlap and not sell out while at the same time find somebody else that, you know, a company of that nature might throw $10,000 at a tour, which might be the difference between coming back with money versus being in the hole by the time you get back from the other side of the country. And again, those are other ways to look outside of the music industry and look at, which in turn, depending on your audience size, can be enough to turn around and someone go, look, my audience is this, and I know you want to reach them in a way that's organic and natural. Here's how we do it. What's it worth to you? Or maybe you're going to tell them what it's worth. You know what I mean? Like it's just whatever you can do to get outside the music industry, understanding that music penetrates all industries, all people, all parts of the world, not to limit it to, well, I saw so-and-so wore a meat dress at the, you know, the award ceremony. If I wear a meat dress, then like, no. But again, it's that lens.
Did we just go from Lululemon yoga pants to meat dresses within like a 30-second? I got to commend you, buddy. I don't think anyone's ever done that on the show.
That's on my notes.
Shout out to Lady Gaga.
Go from Lululemon to meat dresses.
That's good stuff. Right now, how do we circle back? I think I just circled back. Anyways, but it's a great point, right? And we were talking a little bit before we click play or record. Aaron, you and I, around some of your clients that you're seeing are actually outside of the music industry, and they're kind of trying to take some of what we know about how to engage with fans outside, and what you're suggesting here is very much the same, but in reverse, right? How musicians can learn from these big, incredibly large brands as well as local brands, much like we do with artists, and what can I learn from Whole Foods in their marketing if that's my target demo versus, you know, Target. And so
growing together is always great. So, I mean, I think sometimes if you can, just as it's great to identify talent and
early,
you know, jump on board early, it's the same with those third-party companies, people, organize it, whatever it might be, to see they're doing something great and go, look, we could do great things together. It doesn't have to be a Nike or something like that. It could be, like you said, a very local enterprise that, you know, are doing great things and resonate with. So I think I should say that it should never be kind of, well, I'm going to play Jackson guitars even though I hate them and I'd rather play Fender. It's not, you know, you can't get in bed with somebody that you don't want to be in bed with just because, you know, the money's right.
Of course, the authenticity should be there for sure. But like, you know, punk rock and skate shops and now hip hop and skate shops kind of go so hand in hand. There's so much crossover in those three cultures.
Well, look at Red Bull starting their own record label.
Sure.
I mean,
yeah,
you know,
we just shot a video yesterday of a alumni from Pyramind who won the Taiwan Red Bull DJ Championship last year, and he's preparing his set for this year to go compete again. And like, Red Bull does a DJ competition, you know, in every country, every major country in the world. Like, they take music so much more serious than a lot of music companies, and they don't sell music. Right? I mean, they do have a label. I get that, but like, their product has nothing to do with music.
But it's lifestyle brand affiliation,
exactly.
right?
So
you
in
create
a way,
a deeper connection with the audience that way, and you understand what really when you talk about being disingenuous, you know, that's when you create that pairing that doesn't make sense. The lifestyle doesn't match. But when it does match, and when it really, you know, there's a connection with the audience that resonates, then it really makes sense for the artist and whatever brand it is they might be supporting. I think, you know, you made a great point when, you know, if you're going to start playing, you know, Jacksons when you really want to be playing Fenders, you know, that level of disingenuity is going to creep out in your music and who you are as a person and what you're representing for your music. You know, we got to remember, I mean, where did pop music culture come from originally? And the fact that pop music was really a defining phenomenon of culture. And now it's become taken backseat to the nerds and technology that's been driving culture. And I think we're really, you know, there's a fundamental element of struggle going on here for musicians to reclaim their place in culture as leaders and thought leaders, but it's become much more challenging because of the finances, and
well,
so
I really resonate with that. And there's two things, and I'll go back to the branding component, but I was recently in Toronto meeting with a friend, and I can't name who it is, but this person has every award anyone could ever win in the music industry and beyond. And they sort of brought up this issue of, awards come in at the end, like you work your ass off against all odds, and everyone going, you'll never make it. You'll never do it. Right. And then someone comes along with this shiny award and goes, hey, this is so great. Here you go. This is for you, which is almost, and I hope I don't get hate mail on this one, but it's almost like, it's more for the awards than it is for the artist. I mean, it is a sort of a tip of the hat, but where the fuck were you the rest of the person's career, and they didn't just overnight get the award. They've worked their ass off, and at any given moment, you could have recognized that. Meanwhile, there's this, like you said, cultural ambassadors have always been musicians and artists. I mean, that's just something that's always been the case. And in fact, one of my clients, I recently was able to position as the music and culture ambassador of the state of Mississippi. And I remember the governor saying, hey, look, it's being a, spokesperson sounds passé. I'm sure we could do a better title than that. And so for me, it was really important to put cultural, not just music ambassador, but music and culture ambassador, because of the fact that, musicians are cultural ambassadors. And today I just heard on the radio that Canada is putting 125 million into overseas Canadian content, so as to keep our culture and heritage alive, beyond Canada and within Canada, because that's why we have Canadian content on radio and whatnot, to ensure that's not lost. And
here we are in America doing exactly the opposite. So it's kind of an embarrassment, I got to say, from my perspective, at least.
Which, I mean, is a whole topic of conversation within itself too, in the sense of, I mean, Canada is this horrible country to tour in, as far as just how many people live here. And there's all these things about Canada that at the end of the day, our Canadian artists move to the US because it really is, the heart of the industry, and you can play night after night, whereas here you're going to have some nights where you're not playing, and there's not the venues, or there's not the the population and that sort of thing. And so, but anyways, with that being said, I think that looking at things from that perspective of what musicians do, which I think is so valuable, the value of music's always been the experience, and who gives you that experience? Well, the creators of the music. And so how do you take that perspective and run with it outside of the music industry? And I think when it comes to branding, which was my second point, what you'd said, is that within the world of branding, we've sort of gone from this, this is what, if I buy this thing, this is what it will do for me. And this is what it will, these are the great, what's the word? These are the great things it does, whatever. And now we're into studies showing that people that are not religious access the same part of their brain with brands, and that's like a religious experience, and because they feel represented by that brand. Oh, look at me, I use Apple, so
the identification.
I'm creative and whatever. And that's the evolution of the world of branding. Well, music has always done that. I mean, one of the examples I like to use is Bob Marley. I mean, if you think of reggae, you think of Bob Marley. If you think of Jamaica, you think of reggae, you think of Bob Marley. If you think of reggae, you think of one love, positive vibrations. Let's, get together and feel all right. And then, it's Bob Marley, Bob Marley, Bob Marley. But does that mean there's not like, gangsta reggae, so to speak, other artists? I mean, all those things become these things that lead you back to that Bob Marley, reference. And it's not that the songs are all hits. They're not. I mean, if you look at his career, you've got, the ska all the way up to, the reggae that people think, the big hits, but he never defrauded on what he stood for, and the people that he represented were never defrauded by that. And that's sort of like Apple. And that's when brands make bad decisions. It's because they're defrauding the people they've represented by going outside of what that brand is. And in the case of Bob Marley, of which, of course, I'm just speaking by as anyone else who's an observer, an audience. I don't think it was something he tried to do. I think it was just something he did do. I mean, when I read about the fact that the songwriter's credits of No Woman, No Cry were given to his friend that ran a soup kitchen in Jamaica to ensure that they always had, soup for the poor. I don't think anyone told him, "Hey, Bob, you got to do this."
Right, that's a great PR stunt, Mr. Marley. We're going to have you sign
great
here and
PR.
sign
Let's
that.
do some more of that. Let's give.
Well, and also the when you look at footage, and I never got to see him perform live, but he's someone that just ultimately connected both with the music he was creating and with his audience in such a passionate, meaningful way. The guy lived and embodied everything he did musically. Like there was no separation, I don't think, 100%. Of what he made musically versus like his core being. And we don't see artists that achieve that level of fame that are that passionate all that often. Like, and when we see it, we all sort of get freaked out. And like, Prince was one as well. Like, and there's these iconic people.
I might be wrong.
So what's the
this.
takeaway though? As like, hey, I'm in my garage trying to write songs, and I think that they're kind of cool, but I think I'm kind of ripping off an AC/DC lick or whatever. Like, how can we turn these like legendary, icon-driven examples into something that like the kid in the garage or the producer that's just trying to like get a feel for what he's doing? Like I don't know what the answer is, but I'm just like I always try to see like what can we learn from these superstars, especially the non-manufactured superstars.
Do more covers.
Well, I would take that a step further from the branding perspective and then bring it back to the garage by being in essence, on the one hand, my understanding is that Bob's success really took off with the album Legend, which came about, not that late in his career. But it was, my understanding is that they did do a bunch of research, and the word legend was getting associated with Bob. So that was sort of how they came up with the title. And so, that was sort of a projection of this, like words are just icons to their deeper meaning.
Sure.
So if you hear legend, you associate anything that's a legend, not just this particular record. And then if you look at the brand today and, their headphones and all the rest of it, I mean, there's also been, I think, an understanding of the brand to, I don't know if he would have envisioned himself selling headphones, but the fact that they're wood and all this kind of stuff sort of stays true to that general idea. But I think when you go back to the garage, I personally, I guess, annihilate.
There you go.
Everything I've just said up until this moment.
Here we go.
It's great to look at things this way from a nerdy analytical perspective, and how can I make this work with that and all this sort of thing. But at the end of the day, I think that's important to know, like a roadmap. The trip is going to take me 3 hours, or it's going to take me 5. You might have thought it was going to take you half an hour, but it actually took you 5 hours. That's a good thing to know up front, to know that you're going to go to areas that will be, a long distance between gas stations, whatever the deal is. Those are all important things to know. But what gets you on the road isn't the data. It's not the information. It's self-belief. And I think that, in many ways,
ultimately,
the comment of, if you don't believe in yourself, why should anybody else, is, to me, is an important one, because when I go to universities and I talk to people, one of the things I say is everyone in this room must be talented. Otherwise they wouldn't be here. They've had to get in to be here. So if I'm not mistaken, that talent will continue to grow. No one's going to be having to come to your house and say, practice your instrument, write more songs. If you're here, you're doing that anyway. So a lot of people spend time on this idea of literally the emphasis needs to go to building on the music, building on the business, building on all this stuff. But my personal experience is, in fact, probably the most important thing to work on is self-development, because opportunity is around us at all times. There's never a lack of opportunities available to us. I mean, we tend to notice the ones that have a bigger impact. But the fact that the wind blew from a certain direction, or you crossed the road when you did, or leaf, whatever the deal is, there's very small things and larger things happening at all times. The problem is most people don't see them. You know, it's like when that thing doesn't work out and you get, I'm really bummed out about it. Well, if you spend 5 days being bummed out, there's probably been 5 days worth of opportunities that you just closed yourself off from while you're, you know, your tunnel vision of it's this or nothing, impeded you from seeing all these other things that are out here when you're not, got your blinders on. And I think that, actually the biggest thing after sort of going through all this nerdy stuff that I would always come back to is developing yourself, which includes understanding why what you do is so valuable, and then starting to become aware of what it is around you that didn't seem at first to be this opportunity, but rather might be. And if that opportunity presents itself as a bakery, or it presents itself as a car company, or your local mechanic friend, or whatever the deal is, if you're not open to that because you've got tunnel vision, then you're missing an incredible opportunity. I mean, my personal story, the last place I lived in Europe, which is where I've spent most of my life, was a village with 4 houses in the mountains. And I was 40 years younger than everyone. Everyone else made cheese and had goats and that kind of thing. This past February, I was, involved with the Grammy stuff, and I was with people that there's no one higher than these people. And the process of how did I get from a little village in Spain to the Grammys with these different people, and, the sort of clients that I'm getting an opportunity to work with, it isn't so much on data or nerdiness or, if I do this and I do that, more to do with constantly developing myself, which has been through relationships in many parts. Surround yourself with people you want to be, associated with. I mean, at the end of the day, we are being affected by what's around us. I mean, if you go to the president being chosen, what do you call that, the campaign or whatever, I'm certain that you would go on a person's Facebook that was voting, say, Democrat, and another person's Facebook that was voting Republican, and either one of those people's feeds would 99% certainty be winning. There's no chance Trump would win. There's no chance Hillary would win. It was so, I mean, more so than probably any kind of thing 15 years ago. And that's because we end up in these
bubbles.
We're part of a herd community, and then that's what we believe. So surround yourself with a herd that look like what you want to do and want to be, and allow yourself to get pulled up, and opportunities will come because friends give friends opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great, I think we can probably kind of close with that sentiment, because I echo that completely. I've done nothing in my career other than try and give opportunities to people that have either helped me along the way or that I can reach down and help, whether it's through pitching music and licensing deals or teaching or, whatever that looks like. And there's a genuine, I don't do it so I can talk about it on a podcast. There's I do it because it feels good, right? I do it because I want to see that person succeed. And, if that comes back to me, great. If not, so be it. But I think that notion of surrounding yourself with people that are doing, what you want to be doing, or in that same circle, that are successful, that are looking at things as opportunities instead of, like you said, tunnel vision. I mean, Aaron, it's a really powerful sentiment, buddy. Thank you.
Well, it sounds like we're on the same wavelength for sure. I mean, I got to say, honestly, just going back to Jay Frank's stat of whatever it was, 5% of new music, if you spend 20, anyways, there's no way of getting through, if you're just looking at literally music, there's no way of getting through whether it's music submitted to you or music that's out there or music. At the end of the day, we do look to our friends. We look to people to recommend. We look to, again, that herd that's around us and how they react. I mean, it's like, people actually, there's, again, back to nerdiness, there's stats that people will share something more when they see it has more views because they feel better about sharing it. Just like people will join, a golf club and never
I'm
go
the opposite,
golfing.
but
Yeah,
I get it.
Yeah.
Right, of course, because we're we think we're tastemakers, right? So oh, that's totally played out. I'm not even going to go there, right? But I think you're right that the common middle America or whoever, the vast majority of the population thinks the other way. It's a really interesting thing, right? Oh, I don't want to go out on a limb and share this because no one else seems to like it. Oh, what if my friends think I'm weird, right? Sort of what I want my friends to think.
Well,
or
isn't that notion a phenomenon though of social media now?
Turning your friend onto a great record that they ultimately come back, a month later and they're like, man, thank you. that record meant so much to me, or that book meant so much to me. Like, that's a really rewarding
But that's
thing.
a personal thing. That's you turning your friend on, as opposed to through some kind of social media context, because social media really promotes this herd mentality where people kind of flock around those numbers and they see the numbers, and that's validation. And so that enhances the ability for people to want to watch it more and support it more. And I think that's, one of the things I just touched on earlier, and you really riffed off of very nicely, was this sense of, musicians really struggling now for that cultural leadership in society. And I think that's there's a deep sense of loss in our broader society as a result of it, because people don't want to feel like they're trying to forge a path without all of that support and that following. But to really be a great artist, that's what you really need to do. You have to believe in yourself enough to be willing enough to forge that path and create something new and amazing and different that people are going to react to. And we're all looking for those leaders. Those are the cultural leaders that will make the difference, that will create that next new sound, that will make the difference in our industry. And and it's not the nerdiness, it's not the technology, but that just comes up after, just like the awards come up afterwards. At the end of that road, all of those things start to merge together if you've been able to really be true to yourself on that deeper level. And I think that's every artist's struggle now. We all face that within ourselves. It's almost like staring at your own inner demons and saying, I'm ready to conquer you, and I'm ready to believe in myself enough to do that.
Well, I think that, taking that approach even to social media, I mean, yes, there is that nerdy part. There is sort of how do you build your numbers, all that kind of stuff. But I think that once you've looked kind of behind the curtain, you have to then also remember that the action happens on stage, not behind it. And that you have to always be putting on the greatest performance of your life in every way. In other words, see where the map is, know that it's, there's a distance involved and there can be some hills, but at the same time that just people also really connect, even online, with authenticity. And if you can really figure out, like, my personal thing with a lot of musicians on the self-development side, which actually ends up being the biggest thing that I end up doing with clients of every kind, is, but if you do it with a musician, you've got a musician that grows up with parents, bring out their kid and say, okay, now do that thing that you do, or play that song or whatever. And everyone's like, yay, this is great. And then when they get a little older and it's like, this is what I'm doing, this is it. Then all of a sudden there's like, well, that might not be such a great idea. And, that starts happening and you get discouraged. And then you think, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to do this like everybody else is doing it. How are they doing it? Which is, the recipe is totally lacking difference. And I think the biggest thing is tapping back into, what did it feel like when you played that instrument for the first time when you're 6? What were you like? What are those emotions? Because that's what you should be doing at all times, always. No. And when you're doing that and you see someone on stage constantly tapping into that, they're amazing, like just hairs on the back of your neck. They're chilling performances because that person is tapped into why they're doing it, not tapped into whether they've got the room packed, whether they've got, potentially how many people are going to buy their record. It's none of that. It's just, it's real. And that's the sort of Bob Marley thing. That's the thing where then people elevate you. Then people are your supporters. Then that's the Dunbar number of the 150 people that saw that and then went out on your behalf and spread it like crazy. They're the 150 people that took the videos that then uploaded to social media. They're the ones that spread all that stuff. And, it's amazing how that kind of approach will constantly provide a result that is far, far greater than any kind of nerdiness. But in the meantime, still look at what there is, see the roadmap, then put it away and just go, hey, I'm going to forget about that now and get back to making music and having fun.
And hopefully, as a musicpreneur, you'll speak to the fact that every good entrepreneur needs a team. Needs people that will,
absolutely.
Not those 150. I'm talking about that close 3 or 4 or 5 that really want to give and support and see the vision and share that vision. If you can do that, then you're on your road to those 150. But if you can't do
100%.
that, you're not going to get there ever, you know?
Well, and how do you get those group of people? I mean, it's people that believe in you. I mean, it's like I'm right now dealing with some issues with agents, and I'm off to Nashville on the 15th to AIBA, and so what? So you get the big deal agency, big deal record label, I mean, if it's not a big deal to them, it doesn't matter. You know, if they're not going to get behind 110%, it doesn't matter. But if you've got some people that it matters, and you've impacted them with that, incredible talent of tapping into yourself and performing, then, that's what matters. And that's how you get those people. And I think that, you have to, I mean, the biggest thing for me, at the end of the day, no matter what, especially within the music context, is the people that you work with. If the people that you work with show that they're going to do whatever it takes and nothing is going to stop them, like if they have to park their car at the roadblock and walk the rest of the way, they're going to do it, not turn back. Well, that didn't work. I mean, if you're constantly surrounded by people that are always pushing and achieving because it's true to them, just like you perform and make music that's true to you, like then you have this unstoppable team of people that are all in it for the right reason. And that is undeniable. And there's something that the cream does rise to the top. Right.
I think that's an awesome note to end our awesome little podcast on.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking us there, Aaron.
Thank you guys
I thought
for
we
having
wrapped
me.
up once with that really great final thought, and then here we are, the cream rising to the top. But
Yes.
Aaron, thank you so much for your time, buddy.
Yeah.
We do appreciate it.
There it is.
There's his book. Hey, hold that up again. Do it right. We'll get the Letterman zoom in.
Somehow I have a copy of this.
Yeah,
What do you
there you
know?
go. The Musicpreneur, the creative approach to music marketing. So you can pick that up on Amazon. Again, the chapter's on our blog for you to check out, a bit of a sample, so to speak. But anyways, I'm Jeff Straw. Thanks again for being here, Producing Out Loud. If you ever want to get a hold of us, it's producingoutloud@pyramind.com. Please give us some comments in the YouTube video. Let us know what you think. If you've got questions, we'll keep an eye on them. Thanks again for joining us, Greg. Thanks for being here with me today, buddy.
It's always a pleasure,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
I enjoy doing this.
We'll see you soon. All right, guys? Take care.
Take care. Bye now.
If you're a music producer, subscribe to our channel and stay up to date on the latest Pyramind tutorial videos, track breakdowns, elite sessions, and more. Visit us at pyramind.com.